think he might have done if he hadn't been forced to surrender that gun?
I think he would have tried to hurt the baby, to hurt me. He would have done something to Braylon to get to me, because that would hurt me more if he hurt the baby.
Victims trying to take action to protect themselves from abuse, but finding little relief from our justice system.
Yeah, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been victims of physical violence at the hands of their partner. And those victims are 5 times more likely to die if their abuser has a firearm. But iTeammate discovered a huge gap in the law meant to protect them.
iTeammate Stephanie Zepelin found even though police and judges are aware of these dangerous abusers, they really do little to make sure guns are kept out of their hands. Stephanie.
Brooke, Mike, there are federal and state laws meant to protect victims from gun violence. They allow the court to order people convicted of domestic violence or people with a protective order against them to be ordered to surrender their firearms and be prevented from buying more. But our investigation revealed, despite the existence of these gun laws, little is being done to make sure they're enforced and keep victims and anyone who comes into contact with these abusers safe.
I don't want to be here.
It's a tragic scene that plays out across central Indiana. Domestic violence ending in death, and it's increasing in Marion County. Domestic violence homicides totaled 8 in 2017 and at least 11 last year. Brittany Thomas was determined to keep herself and her son from being part of that.
I didn't want to do it because he's kind of crazy, so I didn't know if he would try to retaliate or not, but at the same time, I wanted to protect my baby.
Her relationship with her ex sounds like so many others involving domestic violence.
It was fun, he was nice. I mean, he was a great person, but he had a whole nother side I did not know about.
That changed in August 2017. Brittany turned to the Center for Victim and Human Rights to get a protective order, a firearms prohibition, and a firearms surrender order.
Why did you want to make sure he got his gun taken away as part of the protective order?
Because of the threats he made, talking about doing a mass shooting. He talked about ISIS, talked about shooting his son in the head, and then he told me that he can shoot up to 500 yards.
In order to make sure her ex surrendered his weapons, Thomas's lawyer asked for another hearing, where her ex would have to prove he gave up his guns. Rao Krishnaya and his team at the Center for Victim and Human Rights get about 300 protective orders a year for people like Thomas. There were more than 12,000 granted in Marion County in 2017. But when that protective order includes a firearm surrender, who's responsible for making sure that happens?
There is not a uniform best practice or protocol for ordering surrender or for tracking that.
But the impetus is kind of on you to make sure that it's happening.
It absolutely is, and so we're talking about resources, essentially. We're talking about resources on a number of levels. If we start asking for compliance hearings, there has to, of course, be judicial staff to be able to manage those things. We have to have the staff to handle those compliance hearings.
CVHR only has the resources to ask for those compliance hearings in 5 to 10% of their cases. Krishnaya says firearms prohibitions are often enforced accidentally when the person comes into contact with law enforcement for another crime and police find out they should have turned over their guns.
But there's very little data about people ordered to surrender their firearms and whether they actually surrender them at all. iTeammate went searching for answers and found none. From the county level all the way to the state Supreme Court, nobody seems to be collecting data about these offenders and whether they actually surrender their guns.
So iTeammate decided to dig up and put together that information ourselves. We used court records from Marion County for the first half of 2016 and compared them to each individual's criminal background. We found 18% of domestic violence offenders went on to commit acts of domestic violence again after being ordered to surrender their firearms. And 25% went on to commit other crimes, including breaking and entering, auto theft, battery, resisting law enforcement, and even murder. This shows a significant number of domestic violence offenders continue committing violent crimes, and not just within their own homes.
We have to think about safety issues for not only the victim in the case, but also for law enforcement and other people who might be in contact with that individual who has the firearms.
Where's the follow-up to make sure that those firearms are surrendered?
There is no follow-up at this point.
Kelly McBride is a member of Marion County's Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team. They looked at 6 domestic violence murder-suicides. Cases had to be at least 3 years old, and the family had to be willing to talk.
But we want to identify ways in which we can prevent it from happening. And 5 out of the 6 homicides occurred with a gun. And out of those 5, 4 of the perpetrators possessed a gun illegally.
And most had prior charges involving firearms.
What does it say to you that 4 of those perpetrators shouldn't have had a firearm?
It says to me that we're not enforcing that the gun laws that currently exist.
Advocates like McBride emphasize this is a public safety issue, not just for those in violent relationships, not just for law enforcement, but for everyone.
In the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that this is about a $9 billion a year problem. It is costing us $9 billion.
Analyzing court records and criminal backgrounds of dozens of criminals, iTeammate found of all the people charged with murder in Marion County last year, nearly 20% had prior domestic violence charges.
We don't want the government to take people's guns either. If you're a responsible gun owner, it is your right to own and possess a firearm. As domestic violence advocates, we want those to be possessed legally. We want the laws that are in place to be adhered to and applied. It can save lives.
Possessing guns when you've been served with a domestic violence protection order isn't just against state law, it's against federal law too. Advocates say it's a law with no teeth, nothing to compel law enforcement or the courts to make sure those guns are ever turned over. But they say there's a handful of counties around the country who are doing more to make sure it happens.
So how do other areas handle situations like that?
So in King County, Washington, they dedicated $1 million. Their city council voted on it and approved it to create a special unit combined in the prosecutor's office to make sure those guns are surrendered.
Wow.
Seems to make sense. Well, Stephanie, thank you.